In the heart of an ancient city, nestled amidst the bustling markets and the clamor of daily life, stood a cemetery. Not just any cemetery, mind you, but one steeped in centuries of stories. Each headstone a silent sentinel, guarding secrets from ages past. It was here, in this hallowed ground, that an enigma made his home, a solitary man who chose to dwell among the dead, forsaking the warmth of hearth and kin for the company of ghosts. They say a city is not built on stone alone, but on silence, on the restless silence of those who once walked its streets and never left. And this place was thick with their silence. The old man, for that is how we shall call him, found solace in the hushed whispers of the wind rustling through the leaves of gnarled trees that cast long, skeletal fingers over the graves. And how did this tale begin? No one knows for sure. Some say the old man was a scholar, poring over dusty tomes in the city's great library when he stumbled upon a forgotten legend. A myth that spoke of a gateway to the underworld hidden somewhere within the cemetery. Intrigued, he set out to find it, only to become lost in the labyrinth of ancient tombs. Others claim he was a lover, a man driven mad by the loss of his beloved, who sought refuge in the eternal slumber of the cemetery, hoping to find peace in the bosom of the earth. Whatever the truth may be, the old man became one with the cemetery, his silhouette a haunting fixture against the gray backdrop of mausoleum. He was a fixture like the weathered statues that adorned some of the tombs, their faces eroded by time, their expressions lost to the ages. Day after day, year after year, he walked the paths between the tombs, his footsteps echoing in the stillness, his presence a silent question mark in the grand narrative of the city. The people of the city grew accustomed to his presence, some even finding comfort in the steady routine of his life. They saw him as a living relic of a bygone era, a man out of time, a timeless man. But only the old man knew the truth, the secret that lay buried in the depths of the cemetery, hidden from prying eyes and curious minds. For within that hallowed ground, beneath the very soil he walked on, something stirred, something ancient and malevolent, drawn to his presence like a moth to a flickering flame. And as the years slipped by, the line between the real and the spectral blurred, and the old man was never quite sure if he was truly alone. The first decades of his presence were little more than rumor carried on the damp winds. Those who tended the cemetery keepers with lanterns and gloves blackened by earth spoke of him with unease. They never caught him in the act of entering or leaving, yet his presence was undeniable. A folded blanket left by a stone chamber, a worn shoe print pressed into soil that had not been visited in generations, the faint smell of smoke from a fire no one had lit. The man was not an intruder, he was a fixture, as though the graveyard itself had drawn him up from the ground. He made a dwelling not in one place, but in many. Sometimes he was glimpsed in the hollow of a ruined chapel, its roof half gone, its altar broken, where birds nested in the rafters. Other times, he lingered beneath an archway of stone where ivy trailed down like curtains in a forgotten theater. People began to notice his habits. He never begged, he never asked for bread, yet he survived. Some whispered he foraged herbs growing wild among the stones. Others said he was sustained by something unseen by the very silence that pressed down upon the cemetery. It was during those years that a strange relationship began to form between him and the city outside the gates. He was not embraced, yet he was not chased away. The youth of the city, restless in their daring, sometimes tested one another by peering through the iron fence to watch for his lantern at dusk. Old women, carrying baskets, murmured quiet wishes if they caught a glimpse of him. Shopkeepers began to speak of him as though he were part of the city's folklore, like an omen that promised nothing good, yet nothing directly harmful either. And still, his mystery deepened. Travelers passing through often left written notes tucked into cracks of the cemetery wall, notes of longing, sorrow, unspoken confession. No one knew if he read them, but the next day they would be gone. Some believed he was a messenger, a bridge between the living and the forgotten. Others thought he was simply a man broken by grief, who had slipped into a world no one else could bear to inhabit. There was a story told by a night watchman who swore he saw the man standing motionless at the center of the graveyard during a storm. Rain lashed, wind tore branches from trees, but the man stood still, his face tilted toward the sky, as though he were listening. And when the storm ended, the watchman claimed the cemetery was untouched. Branches remained in place, lanterns unbroken, as though the violence of nature had been held at bay by his very presence. Was it a trick of memory, or did the man truly command a silence so powerful it could tame the elements? The city never reached a conclusion. Time, relentless as the seasons, layered itself over him. New markers rose where old ones crumbled, yet he remained unchanged, like an inscription carved into shadow. People aged around him, faces shifting, voices thinning, until generations passed who could not recall a time when he had not been there. His solitude, far from diminishing him, began to cloak him in a certain authority. Some began to visit him directly, widows carrying wilted flowers, workers worn by hardship, travelers seeking omens before a long journey. They never claimed he spoke much. At most, he offered a gesture, a nod, sometimes a glance that felt like it weighed the soul. One account tells of a woman who visited her partner's resting place daily, her sorrow so deep it hollowed her voice. She said that one evening, the man simply placed a hand on the stone beside hers. Not on her, not on the marker she loved, but on the stone itself. She claimed she felt, in that instant, her grief become light and not gone, but tempered, like glass cooled in water. She left a candle for him every week thereafter, but there were darker whispers too. Some claimed that when he passed, flowers withered faster, that birds went silent, that shadows lengthened unnaturally. An archivist wrote in his diary that he believed the man carried a burden not his own, that he had tethered himself to the departed, and in doing so lost his claim to the living. And still, the question remained unanswered. Why? What secret bound him there, when every instinct of human survival should have driven him toward warmth, toward family, toward the world beyond the gates? The city had begun to forget, but the cemetery remembered. Its stones leaned closer, its soil grew thicker, its silence deeper, and within that silence, the man endured, as though each year only rooted him further into the marrow of that place. This cemetery was his home. As decades folded into one another, the man's existence became less a curiosity and more a legend threaded into the city's bloodstream. Tourists would ask about him, expecting a fable, and be startled when locals pointed to the cemetery and murmured, "He is still there." Yet beneath the layers of whisper and myth, a question gnawed. What secret chained him to that soil of stone and silence? The first hint arrived in the form of a journal discovered in the library's forgotten wing. Its pages, brittle as autumn leaves, bore no name. Yet its handwriting was meticulous letters curled with a strange elegance, words pressed deep into the parchment as though carved rather than inked. Within, scattered among cryptic verses and fragments of observation, lay a single recurring symbol, a circle cleaved by a vertical line, drawn over and over again. No scholar could match it to any known crest or order. And yet, those who had seen the man swore they glimpsed that same symbol scratched faintly on the lantern he carried, as though it had been etched there long ago. Rumors multiplied. Some said he had been a scribe once, condemned for recording truths never meant to be read. Others whispered he had loved a woman of high birth, whose resting place lay within those gates, and that his vigil was not punishment but devotions to 60 years of keeping her company in the only way he could. And still, darker tales arose. That he was not watching over the graves at all, but guarding something hidden beneath them. Something buried not in stone coffins, but in earth untouched by daylight. The cemetery itself seemed to lend weight to these stories. Strange anomalies were noted by those brave enough to wander deep inside. Stones with inscriptions that shifted in appearance, as if words changed when one looked away. Pathways that bent back upon themselves, leading visitors in circles until they emerged disoriented and trembling. An ancient tree at the center, so gnarled it seemed less grown than writhing, its roots gripping the soil like hands unwilling to release what lay beneath. And always, nearby, the man silent, watchful, as though he knew. There is one account, told by a scholar who entered the cemetery with lantern and notebook, determined to unravel the mystery. He wrote that he found the man seated against a sarcophagus, his eyes reflecting the lamplight like glass. The scholar gathered his courage and asked, "Why do you remain?" For a long time, no answer came. But then the man lifted his hand, pointing downward, not toward the grave beside him but toward the soil itself. His lips parted, and though the scholar swore he heard no sound, he understood the gesture. Whatever secret bound him was buried beneath, not above. When the scholar returned the next day, his notes were gone from his satchel, pages torn neatly as if by unseen hands. He never spoke of the encounter again. What was it that slumbered there? A relic perhaps, hidden in the age before the city was stone. A covenant sealed in earth, guarded by one who had forfeited his life to ensure it remained undisturbed. Some dared to suggest it was not an object at all, but a memory is something so terrible, so heavy, that no single generation could carry it without breaking. And so, the man bore it in silence, letting time blur his identity until he became less a person than a vessel of forgetting. Yet his presence was not without consequence. Visitors began to claim that when they lingered too long, dreams followed them home, dreams of corridors lined with unmarked doors, of bells tolling in empty air, of voices speaking in a tongue too old to understand. Always, in these dreams, the lantern glowed ahead of them, carried by a hand they dared not follow. The city grew wary. Officials considered expelling him, yet hesitated. Each attempt faltered, gates found rusted shut, guards struck suddenly ill, storms breaking out of clear skies on the very night action was planned. It was as though the cemetery itself conspired to protect him, or perhaps to protect what he protected. And so, the man endured, a sentinel of the unknown. Whether he guarded grief, or secret, or curse, no one could say. But one truth became impossible to deny. His silence was not emptiness, it was weight. It pressed upon the city, generation after generation, a reminder that some mysteries refuse to be buried, no matter how much earth is thrown upon them. This is a cemetery. This is a man. That is to say, these are the things we would call him, for he has been amongst us so long that we have forgotten. he might have been anything else. By the fourth decade of his vigil, the man was no longer spoken of as if he were human at all. To those born in the city, he was a phantom, a figure they had never known as young, never known as old, only as constant. His beard grew long, his hair fell in silver strands about his shoulders, yet his face did not crumble as faces usually do. Lines etched themselves across his skin, yes, but they carried not the softness of aging, rather, the sharp permanence of stone weathered by endless seasons. In those years, a silence thicker than night began to cling to the cemetery. It was not merely the hush of absence, it was as though sound itself recoiled at the gates. Birds avoided its branches. The rustle of leaves grew faint. Even footsteps within seemed muffled, absorbed by the earth. And at the center of this silence stood the man, moving as though in a dream, his lantern steady, its glow unchanged. A chronicler of the time wrote of a strange pattern. Every 30 years, on a night when the moon was a thin shard in the sky, a procession of strangers appeared at the cemetery gates. No one knew from where they came or where they went. Cloaked, silent, they entered, bearing no torches, and disappeared into the dark. Hours later they emerged one by one, pale and trembling, their eyes wide with something unspoken, and always the man stood watching, lantern lifted, neither welcoming nor forbidding, simply present. The chronicler recorded it 3 times in his lifetime, and his note stopped only when he, too, faded from the city's memory. Whispers thickened. Was the man the host of some secret rite? Was he the gatekeeper, the guardian, or merely a witness to a ceremony too ancient for record? Theories spiraled wildly in order older than the city itself. Guardianship of a relic, a vow made in grief so absolute that even ending refused to claim him. And yet, no proof surfaced. The cemetery swallowed evidence, as it always had. Stones shifted, inscriptions vanished, records dissolved into mildew and silence. The man himself revealed nothing. He did not speak, save for rare murmurs in a tongue no one recognized. He did not beg, did not wander beyond the iron gates. His existence was entirely confined within the boundary of the forgotten. And yet, when eyes met his, when chance placed a passerby close enough to glimpse him, there was something unbearable in his gaze. Not hostility, not warmth, but the weight of someone who has watched the same secret too long and cannot unsee it. One tale remains etched in the memory of the city. A young mason, working near the cemetery wall, dared to ask him, "Why do you stay here?" The man's reply was simple, almost gentle, "Because they cannot be left alone." Then he turned away, and the mason claimed he saw the lantern's glow reflected on a dozen stones that bore no inscription, blank markers, lined like a silent audience. The mason left his work that night and never returned. By now, the cemetery had grown vast with its years. Ivy smothered marble, tree roots split the pathways, statues leaned precariously as though straining to hear the secrets beneath the soil. And in its midst, the man remained, more relic than inhabitant, more symbol than flesh, but even symbols bear a shadow. Those who dreamed of him spoke of hearing, not silence, but the faint echo of countless whispers, voices overlapping, too many to discern. Some woke in cold sweat, convinced the voices had followed them into waking life. Others claimed they saw, in reflection of glass or water, the man standing behind them, lantern raised, though no one was truly there. The city has grown around the cemetery, swallowing most of its grounds, but not the heart. For better or worse, the old iron gates remain, barring not just the dead, but the secrets they hold. Most days, a handful of flowers marks the spot where the man still stands. Every 30 years, when the moon is a thin shard in the sky, someone leaves a lantern at his feet. A man lived in a cemetery for 60 years. He wasn't born there, nor did he die there. He just showed up one day and made it his home. Every morning he would walk through the gates as they opened and spend his days tending the graves, reading the names on the headstones, straightening the flowers on the graves, making sure each one was perfect. At night, he would find shelter amongst the mausoleums, huddling in the shadow of the arching stones. He was an enigma to the town, a mystery that deepened with every passing year. Some said he'd lost his family, had no one to return to. Others claimed he'd buried something precious in the cemetery and was forever bound to the place. But he himself offered no answers, speaking rarely and cryptically. Then one day he was gone. The townspeople found his blanket folded neatly on a stone bench, his lantern extinguished, set carefully at the roots of the old tree in the center of the cemetery. No footprints in the dew, no trace of departure. It was as if he'd never been there at all, and so the people began to wonder what became of him. Some say he finally joined those he had guarded, surrendering at last to the earth that had held him in thrall. Others whisper he was never mortal to begin with, but a vessel borrowed for 60 years until his watch was complete. And there are those strangest of all who believe he remains still, not gone, but hidden, walking paths too deep for human eyes to follow, lantern glowing in corridors beneath the soil. But the cemetery, however, did not forget. After his disappearance, visitors reported that the silence grew heavier, more profound. Candles left by mourners burned longer than their wax should allow. Flowers placed on graves seemed to last unnaturally, as though time itself hesitated in that place. And if one looks closely at the old tree in the center, roots wrapping earth like a clenched fist, they say the faint mark of a circle cleaved by a line is etched into its bark. So was he guardian, exile, penitent, or something else entirely? That is the question history cannot answer. Perhaps the truest weight of his story is not in its solution, but in its persistence. We are left not with proof, but with echoes. A man who lived 60 years among the forgotten, whose silence carved itself into memory, leaving us to wonder whether he was protecting us from the secret beneath or protecting the secret from us. The cemetery still stands, the tree still grips the soil. And sometimes, on nights when the mist rolls heavy, passers-by claim they glimpse a faint glow weaving between the stones. A lantern drifting where no hand is visible. If you have felt the weight of his story, do not let it fade into silence. Reflect on it, share it, carry it forward. Subscribe for more journeys into the shadows where myth and memory entwine. And tell me in the comments below, do you believe the man who lived in the cemetery for 60 years was real? Or do you think he never existed at all?